All right, so you've all probably seen the news by now about these tariffs, and like me, you're probably thinking, oh, what's this going to mean for when I'm out shopping?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really what we want to kind of unpack today in this deep dive is
Mhm.
like, what were those sort of instant reactions from everyday Americans right after these tariffs were announced back in like early April, around the 6th,
Uh-huh.
2025? And we've got some really interesting stuff here, firsthand accounts from shoppers all across the country.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right in. What really jumped out at you when you were first going through all this material?
Well, I got to say, the thing that I found really fascinating is just how quickly things unfolded and how differently people reacted.
Hmm.
Some folks just went into like almost panic mode,
Yeah.
rushing to buy up certain things before the prices went up.
Yeah.
And then others were like, I'm just going to kind of wait this out and see what happens.
Yeah.
It just shows you how fast economic news can make people change their behavior,
Yeah.
or at least think they need to change their behavior.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a really great example of that, like that immediacy, is the story of Charlene and Phil Willingham. They live out in the Chicago suburbs.
Yep.
And, they had been thinking about getting some new kitchen appliances. But once they heard about the tariffs, it was like, game on, let's do this.
Right.
They went right down to Abbott Electronics.
Wow.
And boom, they bought like the whole
Like
shebang.
now 9 yards.
The whole 9 yards, the stove, the fridge, the microwave, the dishwasher, you name it. And Mrs. Willingham, she even said it herself. The tariffs were like setting the fire under them to get moving.
Like the catalyst?
It was a total catalyst, and it wasn't just them either down in Marina Del Rey, which is in LA County.
Yeah.
We heard from Shalise Santos, and she was saying everyone around her was starting to freak out.
Oh,
So she started stocking up on like bulk essentials at Costco.
interesting.
It's almost like this fear of missing out, but like for groceries and appliances.
It's so interesting how that works, right? Because it's like a preemptive strike against potential losses,
Right.
Like people think, okay, if prices are going to go up, I got to get what I need now before it's too late.
Yeah, but before it gets more expensive. Exactly.
And especially with those big ticket items like appliances,
Yes.
right? That suggests that people really believe these tariffs are going to have a real impact on their wallets.
Right, right. They're going to make a noticeable difference. Yeah. And it's not just limited to like the big stuff either.
Yeah.
Stocking up on essentials, like that kind of indicates a broader concern that like everyday things are going to be affected too.
Right. Everything's going up
Exactly.
across the board.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It wasn't everyone, not everyone was jumping on that bandwagon.
Mhm.
We also talked to folks who were taking a much more chill approach, like Greg Harris down in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
He was just doing his regular shopping at Walmart,
Yeah.
and he was like, yeah, I think the economy will bounce back. This is just a blip.
He had faith.
Yeah, he had faith. He wasn't sweating it at all.
Interesting how you can have those two very different responses happening at the same time.
I know, right? And sometimes even in the same places, too.
So what do you think is behind that? Like what makes some people hit the panic button and others just stay calm?
That's a really good question. I think part of it might be how much they trust, like, the whole reasoning behind these tariffs.
Yeah. Do they buy into the president's plan?
Exactly. If they believe it's all part of some grand plan, to help the economy in the long run, they're probably more willing to ride out those bumps in the road.
That makes sense.
But it could also just be about like individual finances. People who have a bit more wiggle room in their budget might not feel the need to stock up.
Yeah, they can afford to be more patient.
Exactly. Whereas if you're already stretching every dollar, you might be a lot more worried about every price increase.
Right. You got to make every penny count.
Exactly. And that brings us to like the big elephant in the room.
The uncertain.
The uncertainty, exactly. It seems like almost everyone we talked to was unsure about like the nitty-gritty details of these tariffs.
Like how much are prices really going to go up?
Yeah. Are we talking like a few cents here and there, or
Yeah.
are we talking like serious sticker shock? And when will these increases even kick in?
Right. Is this going to happen next week, next month, next year? Who knows?
Right. And then there's the whole question of like what products are going to be hit the hardest.
Is it just going to be appliances or is it going to be everything?
Yeah. Is it going to be my groceries, my clothes, my electronics? Like what's going on?
And ambiguity can be really unsettling.
Absolutely. And even for those folks who were considering making those big purchases, now there was that lingering question of like, can I even afford this,
Right. Is this going to break the bank?
Yeah. And Mitchell Kwapik up in Milwaukee, he
Yeah.
summed it up perfectly. He said the whole situation was just scary.
Yeah, I can see why people would be feeling that way.
For sure. But it wasn't just about prices in stores either.
Right. This went way beyond just shopping.
Exactly. The reports also talked about how global markets were reacting and the impact on like people's investments.
So this is about the whole economy.
Yeah, the whole enchilada, we heard from Alonzo Bayana down in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
and he was really worried about what this could mean for his 401k and his pension, that money he's been putting away for retirement.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Those are long-term savings. People are counting on that money.
Exactly. And that's not something you want to mess
Right.
with.
You don't want to see your nest egg disappear.
Absolutely. And then we have Juanita Norris up in Milwaukee. She gave us a really real example of this. She said her retirement account took a huge hit, like $8,000 in just 2 days.
Oh, wow. That's a serious chunk of change.
It is, and it had real consequences for her. She had been planning to buy a car for her kids,
Mm.
and suddenly that plan was like on hold, not because car prices had gone up,
Right.
but because her savings had taken a nosedive.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. It just goes to show how interconnected everything is.
Yeah.
What happens on the global stage can have a direct impact on our personal lives.
For sure, and it can happen fast too. We're not talking about some distant future event. This is like immediate stuff.
It's real-time economics playing out.
Exactly. And, another thing that was really striking was how much people's political beliefs seemed to be shaping their reaction.
Oh, yeah, that was definitely a theme.
It was like the level of urgency or concern people felt seemed to be tied to whether they leaned more towards one party or the other.
So you're saying there was a partisan divide in how people were interpreting this?
Yeah, definitely. For example, Laura Papa, who's a Kamala Harris voter from that same Chicago suburb we talked about earlier, she was like, buy your appliances now.
She was sounding the alarm.
She was totally sounding the alarm. She was calling the tariffs a fiasco and urging people to get ahead of the price hikes.
Yeah.
And then you have Tamala Plain, also a Harris voter, but down in Marina Del Rey, she was already kind of on edge about the economy. She'd made a big car purchase right before the election, but even after all that, the tariffs still made her want to stock up on essentials.
So even though she was critical of the tariffs, she still felt that urge to prepare.
Exactly. And she was really upfront about her financial situation, too, saying she was living check to check.
It's like this underlying anxiety that is affecting people across the political spectrum.
Absolutely. Even if they have different views on the policies themselves, they're still feeling that same economic pressure.
It's a shared experience.
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side, we heard from Trump voters like Dixon Witherspoon down in Nashville. He was a huge fan of the tariff.
He was on board with the plan.
Totally on board. He actually said he loves them. He sees them as being like crucial for American manufacturing, even if it means things get a little rough in the short term.
So he's willing to accept some short-term pain for long-term gain.
Exactly. He even admitted that his own stocks had taken a hit, but he was like, this is a necessary sacrifice. And he was pretty critical of people who were just focusing on the immediate inconveniences. He thought they were being short-sighted.
He's got a longer view in mind.
Definitely. And then there was J.J. Kennedy, another Trump supporter, but up in Milwaukee. And he didn't think his shopping habits were going to change much at all.
Interesting.
He was pretty sure that consumers would just end up paying the difference,
Like they'd absorb the cost.
Yeah. He did say he had some concerns about the construction industry, but overall he didn't seem too fazed by the whole thing.
So we've got people who are enthusiastic about the tariffs. We've got people who are worried. We've got people who are just kind of shrugging it off.
It's a mixed bag for sure. It's like everyone's interpreting the situation through their own lens, their personal finances, their political beliefs. It's fascinating.
It really highlights how complex these issues are and how differently they can resonate with people.
Totally. And when you look at it all together, it really seems like these tariffs, whether people were running out to buy stuff or just staying put, were like turning up the volume on those existing anxieties about the economy.
Yeah, amplifying those concerns.
Exactly. Even if prices didn't go haywire right away on April 6, 2025, that uncertainty about the future combined with those immediate hits to retirement savings for some folks was definitely creating a lot of worry.
It's like those tariffs were the tipping point. They push those simmering financial concerns to the surface.
Yeah, it's like they poked the bear.
Exactly. They introduced this new level of unpredictability into an economy that a lot of people already felt was shaky.
For sure. And those stories about retirement accounts losing money, even in the short term, that just solidified that feeling that like these big economic policies can have real tangible effects on our personal finances.
It brings it home. It makes it real.
It does. And, remember Charlene and Phil Willingham, that couple we talked about earlier at the appliance store? Well, they were both Democrats. And Mrs. Willingham was pretty skeptical about the whole thing. She didn't see how it was going to benefit everyday Americans, and she was hoping for a quick resolution.
He was hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst.
Pretty much. And Mr. Willingham, he just kind of summed it up with like, it is what it
It's
is.
a very resigned statement, is
It
it?
is. It's like this acceptance of things, like these big economic forces are at play and there's not much we can do about
It's
it.
a feeling of powerlessness almost.
Yeah, and you put that together with Mrs. Willingham's more critical perspective, and it just shows you how many different emotions these tariffs are stirring up.
It's a whole spectrum of responses.
Yeah, for sure. So to kind of bring it all home in those first few days after the tariffs were announced back in early April 2025, we saw a huge range of reactions from Americans. Some people were rushing to buy stuff, driven by that fear of rising prices.
Mm-hmm.
Others were playing it cool,
Mm-hmm.
trusting in the president's economic strategy.
Yeah, but almost everyone was united by that uncertainty about what it all meant.
Exactly. No one really knew how it was all going to shake out, and it was clear that people's financial situations and their political views were playing a big role in how they were processing this news.
It's a snapshot of a country trying to figure out what these tariffs mean, both for their wallets and for the future.
For sure, and it really makes you think, considering all these immediate reactions, the panic buying, the wait and see approach, the uncertainty, the anxiety, what bigger changes might this lead to in the long run?
Yeah. How will this affect how people shop, how they manage their money, how they think about the economy in general?
Exactly. It's something to really ponder. The ripple effects of these tariffs could extend far beyond those initial responses we saw back in April 2025.
It's a story that's still unfolding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll have to keep watching and see what happens.